So while I was at Ellenhorn, most of the time I wasn't sober, but I probably was like not really drunk. I was like tipsy a lot of the time, but it got to the point where I started to get like really, really drunk. So like this one time I think I had alcohol poisoning, but I was with my friend at the time who I met who through a client slash staff member, kind of both at the same time. But I drank like it was like the largest Starbucks cup. It was filled almost to the it was filled to like the top line, I think, in the cup, and then it was like grapefruit juice, and I hadn't eaten anything anyway. Because I think, yeah, I just wasn't really that hungry, and I just wanted to go and own drink, and also I thought, well, I could just get more drunk then. But I was like, I felt like I had alcohol poisoning, so I didn't want to go back to the residence because I knew if you blew a certain amount, you'd have to be sent to like the ER, and I didn't want to deal with all that. I don't know how they do with because I thought I had alcohol poisoning. I think I did. So I went to a client's house who was being put up in like this hotel to like recover from it mostly. But then I just figured, so I was there, and then they were texting me and calling me and stuff, and I couldn't really text right. I was like coming out the stereotypical all consonants drunk text, but I was like going back and like trying really hard to type out, so I just typed out like, I'm not a danger to myself or others, they'll like leave me alone. And they said, where are you? And I just was like, said, well, I'm not going to answer you anymore, I'm not a danger to myself or others. And then they had the Arlington police ring me, but I think I was out of their jurisdiction, so that's why I think they didn't show up. But so they were like, where are you? And I was like, I'm not a danger to myself or others, I'm safe, whatever. And I forget if I told them where I was, but they said, are you willing to come back? And I said, no, I'm not willing to come back. And then so the whole night I was getting sick. It was a pretty miserable night. But one therapist came in and was asking about like coming in to give that client a breathalyzer, because he had this plan in place where he would need to blow zeros in order to get allowance money. So he blew zeros because it was mostly just me recovering from the alcohol. And I was still pretty drunk, but he said, oh, you have to go back. So I think he was like worried about potentially losing his hotel because his parents were paying for the hotel. But so he sent me on a bus back, the client, that I didn't go with the therapist, but, and I think the therapist said like, you have to go back, but, so I said, oh, are you giving me a ride back? And he said, no, I'm not working today. But, so I took the bus back, and I was like stumbling, still really drunk, and another client saw me, so like, I saw her, it was really awkward. I kind of just tried to avoid eye contact, but I wouldn't take a breathalyzer. I was trying to get stomach meds at one point. I was so worried I was just gonna blow too high. But at one point I did think I was gonna either blow a zero or close to a zero, which I did blow close to a zero, so I took the test. So they were like to me, oh, so you didn't blow a zero. And I was like, oh. And then they were like, so you were drinking? And I was like, yeah. Because I think they thought I was like trying to hide that I was drinking, but in reality I was trying to avoid going to hospital for alcohol poisoning or like having a way high blood alcohol level. So I ended up not going, but then the next day I still had the dependency. So before the team meeting with like the psychiatrist who I never saw, and like the therapist and my parents, I went and I got to the same guy's house, and I drank like half as much vodka, and I had like a beer or two before that. And my tolerance though, and my like was so high, so I was like just there and no one noticed. My parents tell me, yeah, they did not know I was drunk. So, but they said I would have to go with my family until like I got maybe a hotel, like we were talking about getting an apartment somewhere, but I would go with my family for temporarily or something. And I was like, nervous about that, because first of all, I kind of wanted to get kicked out anyway. I hated it there. I didn't like the doctor. It's just the psychiatrist. I kept asking for a new one, but so it was like, well, I'm scared to go back with them, and therapist would always like tell me like different, like you're playing the victim, and it's just like not helpful. Like he actually encouraged the complex about drinking, but was like stopping drinking at that point. But and I didn't have the Klonopin at that point either, because I was like taking it before that. I was like augmenting it and taking it with sometimes giving it to the client, but they didn't know like I was still taking it at times. But also too, like I was able to like drink enough to compensate for not having it sometimes. But at that point I was with the so I said to the therapist I didn't want to go with them, but I stopped drinking, and at that point I was getting withdrawals, like shaking, becoming hypervigilant. And like before, the therapist would say to me like, oh, I like you better when you're fun, when we're laughing, when we're joking, which when I was drunk. But then, so like, yeah, it's like, even though we didn't know I was drinking, like I can't really fault him for that, but it's just really poor therapy to like say that to someone. It's just, yeah, really irresponsible anyway, because like you want someone to think they can talk about anything. So that was kind of bad, but also like, or it was like really bad. But the withdrawals were happening, and I was shaking, and I was like getting hypervigilant, thinking they were poisoning me, thinking I was like being somehow like trying to like mentally torture me, because like I said, I was like shaking. I felt terrible. I felt like really bad sensory overload, more so than usual, and like I was getting sick, everything. I felt like razor blades were cutting into me. So I thought they were giving me something to purposefully induce these types of feelings and these symptoms. And then I would take clonidine, which masks withdrawal, but then I'd end up trying to get a higher dose of clonidine, because that would help mitigate it, the withdrawal. It actually just more like masks it, is what I've heard. But then if I didn't get it on time, or if whatever would happen, I would start to fall into that thing like, oh, they're giving to me something with a delayed effect, so I think that it's wearing off, but that's really when it starts to kind of kick in. And maybe they have a deal with the pharmaceutical companies that they want, so they're making money off of me taking this pill. I should just like things like that. But yeah, so I mean, thinking about it, it's like, I think, yeah, it's probably hypervigilant. There was probably more like neglect and kind of like at that point not liking me, but at the same time it makes one wonder like, if they could see me going through all these terrible things, obvious withdrawal symptoms, like a client saw me and said, I study addiction, you're going through alcohol withdrawal, like you're dependent on alcohol. And thinking about that, it's like, would you put it past someone who's who's ignoring this, allowing this to happen to poison you? Like, do I think it's probably somewhat of on the hypervigilant side to think that? Yeah, I do, but at the same time, it's still rational. Because at one point I got a new therapist, and the new therapist was talking to me, and he was like, and at one point I started to get that hypervigilance, and he was like, oh, like, you're poisoning me, blah blah blah. And he was like, well, we're not poisoning you. And I was kind of like, he's like, but you knew that, didn't you? And I was like, well, I mean, I knew you were gonna say that, but if you're poisoning me, you're probably gonna deny it. So he's like, okay, well, fair enough. But I don't know. So that was another weird thing, because like, personally, if I thought like that was just like an absurd thing to think, I'm not gonna want people to think I think it. So I obviously was saying it because I was kind of like thinking, like, well, you know, I should let them know, like, hey, I'm onto you. I know what you're doing. So that was what my thought process was at the time. Like, yeah, to say like I'm onto you, kind of thing. It wasn't to think like, oh, I should say this. This is gonna be so like wild and whatever. I was thinking, you know, to tell them like I'm onto you, so maybe that they would stop, because I wasn't sure what else to do about it. Like, I wasn't, like, I was like, again, like only eating and drinking and smoking from open things, but like I was still getting this, so I kind of wanted to like let them know that I was onto them.